What's up, you guys? Welcome back to the Rona Report. This is your host, Elizabeth Chijioke.
I'm Chi.
I'm Robert.
And I'm Marissa.
And Marissa's new. She's joining us today to talk about a really important topic. We had been, for the last couple of days, talking about, just behind the scenes, we were talking about the coronavirus and the George Floyd protest and everything that's going on. And I wanted to, off the top of my head, talk about kind of just the relationship between the coronavirus and racism. But I thought, it would be irresponsible if I left it solely to talking about racism and the coronavirus. So I thought today we could talk about kind of, what's been happening on the ground. I know over the weekend we text Rock and, you said that you had the opportunity to participate in some of the protests. So I kind of wanted to know, what that experience was like for you. If you want to share a little bit about that and what the protests were about and everything.
Yeah, no. So attending some of the protests this weekend, like they definitely have variations of marches, rallies, some that are being very much coordinated and organized and others that are not. So as far as marches and rallies, I will say that definitely large numbers of people and speaking. One thing that was encouraging was, I guess it's just like the number of people in terms of, even in the midst of this pandemic, it wasn't just Black people outside. It wasn't just like a small number of people. Like there's a lot of people, and it was a lot of different people who were out and taking that risk of, one, being in a group, and secondarily, like having to engage where cops are actively just ready to be violent. But I will say, like, an unfortunate thing that some of the, like, I think the rhetoric was concerning, and that honestly got me hotter than anything else, which was people saying, arrest the officers, stuff around reform, when we're past that. Like, we're so far past the idea of arresting these officers, because that's just, again, getting into this police state. And we're so far past this idea of reforming, because you can't reform a system that is actively working the way it was designed, the way that it is intended to work. Like, there's nothing about reforming it to make it better for people who are existing in it, when in actuality, the people existing in it who are being murdered and being gunned down and being brutalized are exactly who it was created to murder, gun down, and brutalize. And I mean, I think there's something about also people coming into it from different vantage points, where you have some people who clearly have done this work before and prior and have been a part of this kind of protest. And then you have people who are coming in who are just for show showing up. And then you have some people who are actively showing up and being a further presence of violence. And by that, I mean, you have people who are taking photographs of people actively protesting and organizing and not blurring identifying features. And we've already seen from Ferguson and other instances of community organizing that when people who are trying to take up leadership in this fight are known, they are killed.
Right.
And so you have people who are actively naming and doing ops work for them.
Right.
In so many ways, because they don't know what they need to be doing or how to do what they want or how to engage with this work, and they're not educating themselves before they engage with it.
Okay. Let's take it back, because I feel like we kind of just like jump right in and we didn't kind of give like any premise to like what's been going on in the community. So this episode is about COVID-19 and the recent George Floyd protests that have been happening in Minneapolis, New York, LA, across the country. So that should give reference to what Rock is speaking about. And so what do you feel, and this is open to, the floor is open now. What has been the difference between the COVID-19 protests and the George Floyd / Black Lives Matters protests?
So the biggest thing for me is what we are protesting. Black Lives Matter protest is protesting the right to live, protesting the right to, if I'm stopped and I know I'm a law-abiding citizen, I shouldn't be afraid of what you're gonna do to me. I shouldn't have to worry about taking out my phone. I have the right to live. I have the right not to feel subjugated in a society that I contribute to. I have the right to not live in a systematic oppression. What the COVID-19 protests are about is the right, they feel they have the right to be served. It's coming from an outright place of privilege that reaches back hundreds of years as I will be served. Open this restaurant because you need to feed me. Open your salon because you need to color my hair. Open your salon so I can get my nails done. I have the right to go out and do whatever I want to do. The greater good be damned. So it's totally about the self, is these COVID-19 protests, where the Black Lives Matter protests are about all of us. So the fact that we had to get out of our house knowing that this disease disproportionately affects us and is killing Black Americans disproportionately. And we still have to get out and be in groups and go out and protest because it's about all of us and the safety of my children and your children and my husband and your husband and my brother and my sister. So that is the number one difference between these protests. And the way they have been handled is nothing less than disgusting. The fact that you have these COVID-19 protesters with no masks, coming out there, yelling in the officer's face, literally threatening their lives with AK-47s, storming into the government building, threatening. This is straight up terroristic acts. If it were anyone else, they would have been shot dead. And to know that for us, I mean, I'm in Dallas right now, and there was just a protest in Dallas a couple of days ago where the police blocked off the protesters on a bridge. And I'm not even kidding. They brought out a tank to stop them from going to the other side of the bridge, to block them in where they were arrested and tear gassed. So me protesting for my life and my friend's life and our dignity is met with so much violence, but someone protesting for themselves in the middle of a global pandemic, that I don't care who I kill. I don't care. You will serve me. I have the right to be served, and that privilege coming out. Yeah. That is the number one thing to me is the difference.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. Chi, did you want to say something?
No, I think that was late. I mean, that was laid out between the two. That was laid out. I think, yeah. When you frame it like that, I have the right to be served. I think that's extremely eloquent, because people aren't looking at it like that, because they're framing it as I want to be able to go back to my normal life. But what is normal white life in America? is essentially being at the top strata of society and benefiting from that position. And they're uncomfortable right now. White people don't like being uncomfortable. They have a lot of issues with being uncomfortable, because it's not really been their history in this country. And you really got to think about it. We got to think about the American Revolution, because you study that, and right. So the British government came over here, took land from natives. The British government told people from Britain, said, hey, we have this space, you guys go, and we're basically giving away land to you guys.
Right.
And the reason why the British government had to levy taxes, even against their own colonists, is because the British government sent aid in the form of troops to defend these colonists against natives and the French. They don't really talk about that part. Right? So the reason why we had all this sugar tax and stamp tax and all of that is because the British Crown was trying to recoup their losses from protecting their investment.
Mm-hmm.
But the white people, the forefathers of this nation, were like, we really not messing with that. Sorry.
Right. So
it's just a history of not liking being told what to do, not wanting to be uncomfortable. It's just their legacy, and it's unfortunate. So yeah.
And I just want to add something real quick. If the like how you can inherit your grandmother's hair, you can inherit your mother's lips, you can inherit, your uncle's voice. The same way that we can inherit these traits, we have inherited past traumas. We can see with a lot of these white protesters, they have inherited this privilege, whether they know it or not. It's something that is ingrained in their system with some of them who don't acknowledge. So if we can acknowledge that this is part of who you are, it's ingrained in your system, part of your DNA, something that you've inherited. The fact that Black people have had these traumas and these grievances that have lasted over 400 years, you really don't think that gets passed down to us? And that it
does. There's studies. That DNA is warped by trauma.
Yeah.
So you're carrying through all of this literally genetic trauma.
Right.
And it's how you move through life. It's affecting your health outcomes. Yeah, I think that's a great point. People don't talk about that. We need more scientists to actually talk about that and to actually have a conversation of this is because a lot of white people think this is in the heads of Black people.
Right.
Like they're making these things up. But there's scientific proof, empirical data to back up a lot of what people have been saying purely from their own experiences. So I think that's a good point.
I do.
So one book I want to reference.
Yeah, go ahead, Ra.
One book I want to reference is The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma. So that is specifically something that was written by Bessel van der Kolk, which is a white person. But again, this is where the dissonance is so profound, is that you have some white folk that are able to recognize so vehemently the things that are inherently true for Black people because they studied it enough, who just lived it. But then all of them are not willing to concede that truth because that truth and that reality makes them have to reconcile the fact that they have unlearning to do to be the good person they think they are. And that they will continue to have to do unlearning for the rest of their lives. And that is scary.
I think that everyone has brought up like a really good point. I did want to like mention something that you talked about, Chi, which is that this place in society, this position in society that forces certain people, white people primarily, to take the back seat, to shut up, to sit down, to like stay inside, has been, like you mentioned, Marissa, since the beginning of time, or since the beginning of at least American history, after natives were, essentially murdered off. But how all of that warped together relates to kind of like this racism and how COVID-19 was handled and how it directly and disproportionately affects like, communities of color. And it's to me, it can't really like, it's so the intricate relationship between the two, right? So one is an effect of the other, right? So what I wanted to bring to the table was that like racism itself is a disease. COVID-19 is also a disease. Both are hidden. One is something that not only affects the body physically, but affects, your psychological being, your spiritual being, your ethical being, your moral being, right? Whereas one, might one does affect the physical, but there is this relationship between the two. And I wanted us to kind of like talk about that.
Yes. Just to piggyback off what you're saying, don't you think it's interesting that the tagline for these protests coming up, or these protests happening right now, is "I can't breathe"? And COVID-19 is a respiratory disease that cuts off your lungs.
Right.
And literally you suffocate yourself in your body.
Wow.
And separately, they're tear gassing people in the midst of this.
They are tear gassing.
And tear gas is banned under the Geneva Convention.
And yet they're putting that out at people during, as you're mentioning, a respiratory pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we have to put our lives at greater risk already with the disease that already disproportionately affects us. Right. We have to get close. We have to band together. It's always been that Black people have to look out for each other, and we have to scream, and we have to shout, and we have to make noise when there is a grave injustice done to us. But that's not our job.
Right.
That's not our job, and it shouldn't be our job. We should not have to police the police. We should not have to call for justice from a justice system, but it's not designed for us. So we have to fix these fatal flaws in our justice system. This is post-slavery. This is post-Jim Crow. It was supposed to be, let's give Black people like the same rights as us. Let's try and give them the same rights. Let's try and integrate our systems in, but the system wasn't designed for us. So what we have to do is tear the system down and rebuild. We have people willing to do the work. We just have to be able to put these policies in the law, put it in writing. With this administration, our rights were being stripped from us, and we didn't even know it. They were removing all sorts of rights, all sorts of protections for us, not only Black people, but for this nation. We think about how, sorry, I'm just collecting my thoughts. We think about how the pandemic team was torn away. Why? Because Obama did it. We think about how this administration people hated the previous administration so much. They hated the fact that they had an educated Black man with no scandals. They hated that he had nothing. They couldn't put anything on him, that they were willing to put a whole white supremacist in here and make any type of excuse for any of his tragically devastating failures that he has put into this office. All to spite. All out of spite. We saw, sorry, I'm trying to figure out where I'm going. We saw the church. Did you guys see what happened with the church and the photo op? Yeah. How they were actually they were peacefully protesting.
They were peacefully protesting there, and he cleared it out.
He cleared it out for a photo op with a Bible.
Yeah. And they said that I was watching this video of the bishop of said church, and he said most disgusting. He was like that. It was
condemned for that.
Yeah. Like it. And for me is what has scared me in the last, because I'm a student of political science, and exactly these are the sort of things in history that you see that destroy a republic, right? So, and we have a lot of the pre-existing sort of conditions. We have a pandemic. We have already existing issues concerning wealth and inequality around that. Now we have the social unrest that could literally tear apart this nation, and we have somebody who does not respect the idea
anyone.
Yeah, he doesn't respect
anyone.
The idea of America. There are a lot of presidents that are problematic, that have been as racist as can be. Like Lyndon Johnson was probably a card-carrying racist, but he cared more about the idea of America than he cared about his own personal racism. So he knew, like, okay, if we don't fix these problems, I'm telling you, if we don't fix these problems, if we don't give these Negroes something, we're not going to have action at all. But Trump don't care about the
They expanded that cage, but there's still a cage. Every little bar of just inequality of education, medical, housing, all of that shit is still just as present, still as prevalent. They just
Yeah.
gave the bird more room to fly, but they said you still can't fly free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
And
enjoyable.
I'm sorry. I was gonna say, like, if you watch the Black Panther documentary on Netflix, which I suggest everyone does, it's so good. But it is so heartbreaking to know that today's world, we are still asking for the same things that we were asking in
Yeah.
1965.
Which is why we need to stop asking. And that's my
Why
point,
are
is we didn't get the right to vote by voting. We didn't get freedom by pleading and asking and even slicing our wrists and showing we bleed red too. None of that worked. It took a demand, and then it took the ability to ensure, enforce, and secure that demand, which is not going to be asking and which is not going to be laws. Because, and this is me pointing out Kimberly Crenshaw, like thinking back to Kimberly Crenshaw's, how the visibility of rights on paper make the invisibility of their execution, enforcement, and actual security that much scarier. Because Black people around the country, a lot of Black people have the right to vote, but how many of them have access to polls? How many of them actually have the ability to be informed? How many of them actually have all the different things it takes to execute that right? And when you have the inability to execute, what is that right but just something, words on a paper? And they're willing to give us words on a paper all we want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't even think people do that anymore. I feel like that.
I think that they're scared about that because they've seen how much that can gear us up, because we can point to something and say, hey, this
Right.
matters because you said it was real.
Exactly.
You see how hard they're fighting against mail-in voting.
Yeah.
That would make it, how hard, straight up,
we
just
know when more
lying.
people vote, we know
Yeah.
when more people vote, you don't have Republicans in office.
At
You know
all.
that. When there's more voter turnout, the people that are more interested in deconstructing any semblance of Black life do not come into office. That's why you see Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump pushing hard. But what's in the pandemic? In a pandemic, the only solution is to mail-in voting. So it's hard to say, well, let's go send everybody to the polls where people could be hostile. No, just do it. Just mail-in voting. But if you actually give people more access to voting, you have more equitable outcomes, and they do not want that. They don't want that. They're not interested in that at all. They're doing everything that they can do, because what's happening, the white fragility is on the basis, and we could really, if we really want to dig into it, white genetic erasership. They're scared of that. So they know that in this country, they are losing the mandate of being the majority race. So they're trying to find ways to engineer their dominance in society, even though they will not have the numbers going forth into the next half of the century.
But isn't that sort of, okay,
Because
just to play devil's advocate, isn't that sort of the silver lining in all of this? Because of the inequality, because of the show, like the open hand of disrespect in the face. That's where we've gotten more progressives in office. That's where we've gotten more women of color in office, because people are actually physically going out there and voting. I know in Ohio, they just managed to dethrone this notorious white supremacist named Stephen King. He just lost his primary in Ohio.
That was Iowa. That was Iowa.
Oh, Iowa, excuse me.
Yeah.
But he just lost the election. People are starting to have, it's become too much even for people that don't want to see it. It's become too much for them because it's in their face all the time. The massive amounts of disrespect, the open racism, the I don't give a about you or your kids or your family, not only just to us now, but to the poor as well.
Yeah.
We have a lot now. Black people have more in common than with poor white people, and they can see it. They're under attack too.
White people have always had a lot in common with Black people, but rich white people.
But they don't like to see that.
They don't like to. They don't like to.
They don't like to acknowledge that at all.
I went in the rural in rural Ohio, and it literally looks like the hood. It's literally the same thing. It's just poor white people. It's the same outcomes, often health outcomes. It's the same educational, social, economic outcomes. But they cling on to racism like nobody's business. But
just to think about like that historical perspective, because even like at the rally last week, there was definitely someone who was formerly who was not formally, they were a leader, but they still are a part of I guess, in whatever way, Young Lord's Party, but then you also have the Black Panther Party and who is it? I'm trying to think of the Rainbow Coalition. And that's me thinking about how, again, why
they had the Asians had one too. They were yellow.
Right, right. And so it's like the coalitions have existed before of people recognizing that irregardless of our race, our class, or ethnicity, whatever, like we may not have every single identifier matching up, but our circumstances are the same. Because in actuality, the people who are against us are the same. And that's because they trying to accumulate wealth. And I think I want to credit, yes, the Steve King loss is something that should be celebrated, but I also want to go back to this idea of these systems inherently are not what are working, because even a Black man president sent the same drone that is going over protesters now to go kill citizens in other countries.
This is true.
And that's me saying that this system will forever change you before you change it. So don't think just because someone's leaning towards a way within a system that is inherently going to shift away from prioritizing lives.
And I think go ahead, Chijioke.
I was gonna say I you know me, I'm always optimistic about, you know, about everything. It takes a small ripple in the river to become a bigger ripple. So I don't want to discredit the fact that all of these little things, the dethronement of Steve King, you know, Obama being in office, or whatever the case may be, I think all of those things consequently will add up to something greater. I don't want to discredit, you know, all of these little moves, because at the end of the day, I do think that it's those little things that create bigger change. And so I didn't know if that's what you meant, Rock, but I just wanted to say that really fast. And I know that, you know, you have to get off, you know, so for the essence of time, but I did want to ask one last question, which was like, what do you see the outcome being of the George Floyd protests?
Right now we see it's only been, I think, less than a week that these protests have been really going on, to the extent that we see, and right now it's over 21,000 new cases of coronavirus. I think that, unfortunately, what Dr. Fauci was saying is that we needed to flatten the curve. I don't see that happening at all. I see us having to go back into quarantine, matter of fact, by November, because it's going to be influenza season, and it's supposed to be one of the worst winters in American history. So, unfortunately, I am not optimistic about this year. I feel that, once again, we have to keep putting our lives on the line to make a statement or to be heard, but I don't feel like this is going to end well. We saw how, on our part, on Black people's part, we went inside and we went about our business, but I see more violence, especially if they're being told to go back inside, especially if we're running out of aid for people and people aren't getting the aid that they need to be able to support their families. I don't see the Senate giving any sort of financial relief. Mitch McConnell, the evil demon that he is, has decided that he doesn't want to give any more blue state bailouts, which we all know is outright BS, because blue states fund red states.
Yeah, everybody else, including Kentucky's raggedy.
Kentucky is the third most impoverished state. So I don't know who in the hell put this fool in charge of anything other than his bowels.
And you know what's funny? Mitch McConnell, quick aside, Mitch McConnell had polio. If it wasn't for the polio vaccine and that being pushed,
but that's how it works. Pull that ladder right back up.
Yeah.
It helped me. I don't want it to help y'all, though.
A lot of people don't know that Mitch had polio. If it wasn't for polio vaccine, he wouldn't be here. But yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're fine. But I'm just saying, like, you know, we have people that are taking care of us, but they don't know how. Steve Mnuchin thought that $1,200 should last a family 3 months.
Man.
So we just have people who don't know what they're doing. We have everybody do the best that you can to go out and vote in November, get these fools, because it's not just Trump. because he has serious enablers.
It's a system of
It's
how
a
did he
system.
get? How did he not get impeached?
He
Did
did get
a
impeached. He
whole
technically
troop-
did.
He was
He
impeached,
did get
but they
impeached.
voted to
He
keep
just
him in
didn't get,
power.
yeah.
He's
They
impeached
didn't
by
remove
the
him from
House.
power.
He's not impeached by the Senate. So technically, like,
No, he's
Removed
impeached.
by the Senate. Yeah,
He's
Historically,
actively
he's
impeached.
impeached like Bill Clinton is impeached.
right.
Yeah.
But
Right.
they had to vote for him to finish out his sentence, and
They
they
had to
voted
vote
for
for
him
him
to
to
finish out his
remove,
sentence.
and they didn't.
So those
remove.
Republicans, a lot of those Republicans have already straight up lost their seat, like Susan Collins. I know they go a little harder on her because she's a woman, but she still told her people, like, I'm not going to back Trump and all this other stuff, but she still voted to keep him in power. I will never forgive you Republicans that voted to keep this idiot in power, and now we have this pandemic going on.
I know they probably regret it. The issue, the Republican Party Republican Party traded their semblance of integrity for power.
Sure did. And now they're about to lose a lot of it.
Just as quick.
Now, I think the Republican Party will be paying for this decision, this choice, for probably the next 3 or 4 cycles. And by then, the population demographics of this country will be so unfavorable for their brand of politics that this might be the last Republican president, unless they totally decide to be a whole different party.
We can pray.
So that's when I look at the numbers on the ground, I'm hopeful for America, but my fear is that the damage is so acute and so severe that it might not matter. If we are able to make it as a country through the next couple years, if we are able to stop this man from getting another term, then we could really turn around. But there's so much damage, not even that Trump has done within America, but if you start looking at what he's done outside with our relations with other countries,
United Nations, every relationship that he said.
Child, look what he did to his damn self. He lost more money than anybody else in America. Who put him in charge of anything? Damn.
I'm actually worried. I think that a lot of things, and this is not even, this ain't the Trump report. This is the Rona Report, you guys. We're supposed to be talking about COVID-19, but I did want to shed light on all of the things that will come to light after he's out of office that he's done behind the scenes. Oh my God! Because
it's also just his administration.
The iceberg. We're only just seeing what we have to see, or what the public is allowed to see right now, or what has been unveiled. I'm so afraid of all of the things that he's done underneath the table to America, to our democracy, just everything, and that's what really scares me. So, not saying that we are beyond saving. I don't know what we're Nigerian and we talk about countries that are like beyond saving. Not saying that Nigeria is beyond saving, but like there are far worse countries in the world who we still have hope for. So the United States, we should still have hope for.
I believe that. I believe that in my heart and soul too. But the scary part is that there are people in this country that are more interested in maintaining their position relative to other people in this country than they are to keeping the country together. That they're more afraid to. And the thing is, it wouldn't even be a back seat. It wouldn't even
would just be alongside me. It would just be next to me. It's not behind me.
Back seat, bro. Like, Black people.
But the thing is, people only understand things in the power structures that exist, and that's why.
Exactly.
And this is my point. As much as I may not sound like I am optimistic, I would not wake up in the morning if I didn't have hope.
Of course.
Yeah.
Black people have made it this far.
400 years.
So the idea that we can't make it through this, beyond this, and thrive in a lifetime, like that's almost a guarantee to me. That Black people will be thriving. There will be lifetimes where Black people are thriving in their spaces, and it's just the breaking down and chipping away of all those systems. But that's my thing, is that can't be compromising. And so again, that's why I'm so apprehensive about it's like, okay, cool, we can miss voting, but it's also at the end of the day, like, I don't believe in your system of government because it's never governed me.
Right.
I don't believe in your understanding of what crime is and what justice is because you've never shown You've never really criminalized criminals in terms of when you think about like Brock, what's his name? Brock Turner.
Yeah.
And the fact that this man literally raped an unconscious woman, and people who are protesting are likely to be incarcerated longer than him. So you clearly don't understand crime, and you clearly don't understand justice. So why should I look to you for those definitions?
Right.
Yeah,
And that's where I'm coming
I see
from
where
in
you're
terms
coming
of
from, Ross.
we can entertain it to alleviate harm, but we can't think that that's going to be it.
Yeah.
Just real quick. I agree with what you're saying, Rock, where it's like, I think that before you were talking like how power comes in cycles, right? How we will thrive. We will get to that point where we are thriving. I just want to remind everyone and the people that are watching that Black people come from kings and queens. They used to rule over Spain. They used to rule over Italy. They don't like to teach that to us in school, but they used to be kings and queens and reside over Europe. Places of knowledge were great historical places of knowledge were in Africa, not just Egypt, multiple places. Power will come. We have to keep fighting for it. Unfortunately, we shouldn't have to, but we do. And I'm proud of our people that just can wake up every day and do that. It's a maddening system, but I feel like we have to lean on each other for support. We have to lean on each other because we know what we want and we keep pushing and we get things done. And I feel like, and we actually set the example for other races when they go out and they protest. Other suppressed minorities, they look at the Black community and say, how did they do it? And we are the example.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which is exhausting, but
it is exhausting. It is.
And Black joy can exist in the midst of, I think, Black struggle too, and that's something that I want. Like, I feel like, yeah, exactly. Like taking care of ourselves. Yeah. So Black joy exists throughout, like in all these contexts, in terms of like even in the midst of struggle, like Black struggle, there still is Black joy, and those can exist in conjunction in terms of thinking about like the creativity that is always a part of how like we take up space and we move through the world, and so that those outlets are never going to be shut off. And so we still have those spaces, and I think those reliefs and kind of thinking about how, again, it's like taking care of yourself is also absolutely necessary. And that's why when it comes to, I think, people who are doing any work on the ground, any kind of organizing like that, like I make a point when I'm in conversation to say that it's not about you wearing yourself out to fight this system, because if you wear yourself out fighting it, trust me, you wearing yourself out is not going to be the end of it. And then it wins because it lost another person to be chipping away at it.
Thank you so much for watching a Rona Report. My name is Elizabeth Chijioke. I'm your host.
I'm Rock.
I'm Marissa.
All right. We hope to see you again next week.
Okay.
Rona Report.
This is the Coronavirus Task Force, aka the Rona Report. And thanks for having us. All right.